5 German shepherds, locked inside a rusted container, drifting endlessly across the Atlantic. No land, no voices, only the sound of waves and the slow fading of life. They didn't bark, they didn't cry, they had already accepted their fate. But destiny wasn't finished with them yet, because miles away, a U.S. veteran named Jack Turner was about to hear a distress signal no radar could detect, only the call of compassion. And what he found inside that container would uncover a secret the world was never meant to know. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and if you still believe that kindness can change the world, hit that subscribe button, because every click is a heartbeat of hope. The morning mist rolled heavy over the coast of Maine, swallowing the horizon where sea and sky became one endless shade of gray. The air carried the scent of salt and rust, and the cries of distant gulls echoed like ghosts. Jack Turner tightened the collar of his weathered jacket, eyes scanning the churning waves. At 42, Jack looked like a man carved from the very cliffs that bordered the Atlantic. Broad shoulders, square jaw shadowed with stubble, and a face that carried both discipline and exhaustion. His hair, once a deep brown, was now streaked with silver, and his eyes, gray as the sea, had the stillness of someone who had seen too much war and too little peace. Jack had been a U.S. Marine once, a field operative stationed in Afghanistan, the kind of man who followed orders, who buried fear beneath layers of duty. But when his canine partner, a German shepherd named Max, had died shielding him from an explosion, something inside him had fractured. Since returning home, he worked quietly with the Harbor Rescue Unit in Portland, Maine, searching the waters for the lost, the forgotten, the drowned. It wasn't heroism anymore. It was penance. This morning, his team of 3 volunteers stood beside him on the deck of the small patrol vessel, Northwind. Among them was Sarah McKinley, a local paramedic in her early 30s. She was tall, thin, with copper hair pulled into a messy bun beneath her orange life vest. Her freckles stood out against pale skin reddened by the cold. Sarah's calm confidence always seemed to clash with Jack's silent brooding, yet there was a quiet understanding between them, the kind born from seeing too many things they couldn't unsee. Metallic object, drifting northwest, came the voice of Tom Reyes, the radar technician, a young man with a short beard and an easy smile that hadn't yet learned the weight of tragedy. He leaned over the screen, tapping it. Looks like part of a cargo shipment. Maybe debris from that storm last week. Jack squinted into the fog. Could be. Let's take a closer look. The boat cut through the waves, the engine's hum steady beneath the whistle of the wind. As they approached, a dark silhouette emerged, large, rectangular, floating awkwardly with one corner dipping below the surface. A shipping container, rust bleeding down its sides like dried blood. Jack felt a strange unease ripple through him. The ocean had its own kind of silence, but this was different. He could feel it in his bones. Tom threw a grappling hook and secured the vessel. Jack grabbed a flashlight and stepped forward, his boots thudding against the deck. Sarah frowned. "You think someone's inside?" Jack didn't answer. He moved closer, knelt by the dented metal doors, and brushed away layers of salt and grime. The padlock was broken. Something had forced it open, then slammed it shut again. The edges were corroded, the smell sharp, metal, rot, and something else. Something alive. Once, perhaps, still. He motioned to Tom. "Help me with this." Together, they pried the door open. The hinges shrieked in protest. What waited inside made the 3 of them freeze. 5 shapes, tangled together in the half-dark, ribs showing through matted fur, eyes reflecting the flashlight like faint embers. The air was thick with the stench of urine and salt. The creatures didn't move at first, too weak even to flinch. Then, one, larger than the rest, black and tan, lifted its head and made a sound that was not a bark, not even a whine, just a hoarse gasp for existence. "My God," Sarah whispered, stepping forward. "They're dogs. German shepherds." Jack's breath caught. His mind flashed back to Max, to that final moment in the desert dust, the sound of the blast, the last look in those loyal eyes. He swallowed hard. "They're still alive." Tom hesitated. "We can't bring them aboard without a harness. The hull's unstable." "Then I'll go down there," Jack said. Sarah turned sharply. Jack, the water's freezing, and look." She pointed to the dark fin cutting through the surface nearby. "Sharks." But Jack was already unbuckling his vest. "They won't wait." He plunged into the icy Atlantic. The cold hit him like 1,000 knives, but he kicked forward, fighting against the tide until his hands gripped the container's edge. The first dog flinched as he reached inside, its breath shallow, its eyes glazed. Jack murmured softly, voice trembling, "It's okay, boy. I've got you." He lifted the dog into his arms, muscles straining as waves slammed against the metal. Above, Sarah and Tom threw down a rope. The dog's body was feather light, bones under skin, but when Jack's hand brushed its muzzle, the animal licked him, just once, weak and deliberate. It was not gratitude. It was faith. "Pull!" Jack shouted. Together, they hoisted the dog onto the deck. He went back again, and again. 5 times through the freezing water, 5 times his lungs burned and his vision blurred, but he didn't stop. By the time the last dog was lifted out, his fingers were blue and his chest ached like fire. Sarah wrapped a blanket around him the moment he climbed aboard. "Jack, you're insane," she muttered, her voice breaking between anger and relief. He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the dogs, now huddled together on the deck, trembling but breathing. The biggest one, the same black and tan male, stared back at him. On its neck hung a torn leather collar. Faded letters read one word: Ranger. Jack whispered, half to himself, half to the ghost of Max, "You made it, didn't you? All of you." For the first time in years, something inside him stirred, something long buried beneath duty and loss. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was redemption. As the north wind turned back toward the coast, the fog began to lift, and sunlight cut through the clouds like a quiet promise. The winter sun barely touched the pines behind Jack Turner's cabin, a lonely wooden house crouched between the forest and the sea. The air smelled of pine sap and salt, and the waves crashed rhythmically beyond the fog-covered shore. Inside, the faint crackle of a wood stove filled the silence, a steady reminder that warmth still existed in a world that often forgot it. Jack stood near the window, his tall frame outlined by the dim light. His face, rugged and marked by time, looked softer now, though his gray eyes still carried that quiet vigilance that never quite left a soldier. His hands were rough, scarred, the kind that had held both rifles and lives. For the first time in years, they were busy with gentler things, bandages, bowls, and blankets. 5 German shepherds lay on the worn wooden floor of his living room. They had come to him half dead from the ocean, but here, under the slow rhythm of the fire, they were learning what safety felt like. Jack moved carefully between them, kneeling beside each one in turn. The largest, Ranger, around 7 years old, lifted his head when Jack approached. His coat was thick and dark, though patches of it were still thin where salt had burned through. His amber eyes followed Jack's every move, protective, assessing, like a soldier watching his commander. Ranger had been the one who first licked Jack's hand on that rescue boat, and since then, he rarely left his side. Beside Ranger lay Luna, the only female in the group. She was smaller, leaner, her fur a soft sable tone with streaks of cream around her muzzle. One ear bore a small tear, a scar that gave her an air of quiet endurance. She was gentle but wary, flinching at sudden movements. When Jack first touched her, she had trembled as though expecting pain. Now she often rested her head on his boot, finding peace in the weight of his stillness. Near the stove, Scout, the youngest, barely 3, chewed softly on an old towel. His coat was lighter, golden with black along his back, and his ears stood at uneven angles, one always slightly drooped. There was mischief in his eyes, the spark of a survivor trying to rediscover joy. When Jack caught him sneaking a biscuit off the counter earlier that morning, Scout froze, tail between legs, but the corner of Jack's mouth had curved just slightly. It was the first hint of laughter in a long time. The other 2, Diesel and Echo, were different. Diesel was massive, 6 years old, broad shoulders, heavy chest, a scar along his hind leg that hinted at something violent. He was quiet but alert, never sleeping deeply. Echo, the last of the group, was the most withdrawn. His fur was pale gray, and his eyes, one brown, one cloudy blue, seemed to look past everything, as if he were half somewhere else. He never barked, not once. When the others ate, Echo waited until they finished, slipping forward silently to take what remained. Jack had learned their rhythms over the weeks since the rescue. Schultz moved around them with patience, speaking in a low voice that carried more calm than command. "Easy there," he'd murmur when Ranger tensed at a gust of wind, or when Luna woke from her dreams with a soft whimper. Every night before sleep, he checked their water, their wounds, their breathing. And when he sat alone by the window, watching the waves fade into the dark, he felt something stir in him, a strange mixture of responsibility and redemption. The nights were hardest. The forest outside whispered like old ghosts, and the wind crawled through the cracks in the cabin walls. Jack often woke to muffled sounds, soft growls, short cries, paws scratching the floor as if running from nightmares. He would rise, light the small lantern, and see Ranger sitting by the door, staring toward the sea. His tail still, his ears perked. Jack followed his gaze once, but saw only darkness and mist. "What are you looking for out there, boy?" he whispered. Ranger didn't move. Only the low rumble in his chest answered, deep and uneasy. Jack tried to brush it off. He told himself the dogs were remembering. Trauma burned deep into muscle and bone. But the longer he stayed with them, the more he sensed something shared, something that bound them together beyond instinct. When one stirred, all stirred. When one trembled, the others leaned close, pressing their bodies together as if holding on to a promise no one else could hear. A few days later, on a gray afternoon, Jack stood outside stacking firewood when a distant sound broke the quiet. A delivery truck pulling up the gravel path. The driver, an older man with a trimmed white beard and a red cap, handed him a small package. "For Turner," he said, squinting at his clipboard. "No return address." Jack frowned. He rarely received mail. After the truck left, he carried the package inside. The dogs watched him closely, their eyes following every motion. He sliced the tape open carefully. Inside was only a single envelope wrapped in brown paper. No note, no sender, no seal. He hesitated, then unfolded the contents. A photograph slipped out onto the table, an aerial shot, grainy but clear. It showed a compound surrounded by dense jungle, its center lined with kennels. In one corner, 5 dogs were chained to a fence. Jack felt his breath catch, the shape of their bodies, the slope of their ears. It was them. Ranger, Luna, Diesel, Scout, Echo. Their eyes hollow, ribs visible, faces turned toward the camera like prisoners. He flipped the photo over. On the back, written in neat, deliberate letters, were 4 words. They were not meant to live. For a long time, Jack just stood there, the photo trembling between his fingers. His heart pounded in his chest, not with fear, but with a slow, growing fury. The dogs stirred uneasily. Ranger approached, nudging Jack's leg as if sensing the storm behind his silence. Jack crouched down, resting his hand on the dog's head. "It's all right," he whispered, though the words were hollow. He knew nothing was all right. Whatever these animals had endured before he found them was not an accident. Someone had done this. Someone who still thought they should have died. Outside, the first flakes of snow began to fall, soft and cold against the cabin window. Inside, Jack stared at the photograph again, his reflection mirrored faintly in the glossy surface, beside the haunted faces of the dogs. In that reflection, he saw not a rescuer, but a man standing at the edge of a truth he wasn't ready to face. The next morning came gray and heavy, the kind of sky that pressed down on the earth like an unfinished thought. Jack Turner sat at his kitchen table, the photo of the 5 chained dogs spread before him. The coffee in his cup had gone cold hours ago. His reflection stared back at him from the glossy surface of the image, haunted, uncertain, angry. The words scrawled on the back burned in his mind. They were not meant to live. He'd been a Marine long enough to recognize precision in handwriting, the neat strokes of someone trained to control everything, even their penmanship. Whoever sent this wasn't warning him. They were testing him. Jack reached for his old laptop, its surface scratched and dull, the keyboard missing letters from years of use. He wasn't much for technology, but years in service had taught him how to look where people said not to look. He searched for any mention of Argus connected to military contracts. What came up first was sterile. Argus Division, Private Defense Research Partner, Virginia, USA. Their website was all patriotic polish. Flags, mission statements, smiling handlers beside sleek canines. But beneath that image, something cold pulsed. a corporate facade too clean to be real. He leaned closer, scrolling through archived pages until he found a small line buried in a footnote. Project Silent Fang, operational 2017-2021. His gut clenched. He whispered the words like a curse. Silent Fang. He dug deeper, bypassing press releases and news articles, until he reached an old forum for military contractors. There, among usernames that smelled of secrecy, someone had written years ago, "Don't take K9 work under Argus, they break them." Another comment below, marked with a red flag, read, "They trained them to obey without hesitation. If a dog hesitates because of love, it's destroyed." Jack's fingers tightened on the mouse. That single line hit him harder than he expected. He could almost hear Max's bark again, the way the old shepherd used to circle him before missions, eyes bright with loyalty, not programming. He exhaled slowly. "You don't break loyalty," he muttered. "You earn it." Later that day, Jack drove into town, the dogs left under the watchful eye of Ranger. The truck groaned along the dirt road, tires crackling over gravel. He parked outside the Veterans Center, a weathered building with a faded flag out front. Inside, the air smelled of dust and old coffee. At the front desk sat Ben Harris, a man in his late 50s with a graying beard and a limp from an IED blast years ago. His blue eyes, bright but tired, softened when he saw Jack. "Turner," Ben said, leaning back in his chair. "You look like hell." "Thanks," Jack replied with a faint smirk. "Need a favor. You still have contacts at DC?" Ben's expression shifted, serious now. "Maybe. Depends who's asking." Jack placed the photograph on the desk. Ben's brow furrowed as he leaned in. "Where'd you get this?" "It came in the mail. No sender." Ben studied the image, then the coordinates printed faintly at the bottom corner. "These are from a satellite feed. Classified. Someone wanted you to see this. I need to know what Argus Division is really doing." Ben sighed, rubbing his temples. "You don't want that kind of heat, Jack. Argus works off the books. Experimental tactics, private funding. They operate under defense R&D, but answer to no one. I heard whispers about them years ago. Project Silent Fang or something. You're better off forgetting it." Jack's jaw tightened. "I can't forget it. They tried to erase them." "The dogs?" Jack nodded. 5 of them. I pulled them out of the ocean. They're alive." Ben's hand froze mid-air. "Christ. Then you've got a problem. If Argus finds out, they'll come for them. Those animals are government property on paper, disposable assets." The word disposable hit Jack like a physical blow. His voice dropped. "Not anymore." Ben looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. "All right. I'll reach out to someone I trust. Guy named Miller used to work logistics for Argus before he quit. Said the place made him sick. But Jack, watch your back. You're not the only one looking for them." That night, Jack sat alone again in his cabin. The wind had picked up, rattling the window panes. The dogs lay scattered around the room, their breathing slow and steady. Ranger stirred when Jack's phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Meet me at the pier. Midnight. Come alone." Jack hesitated. Every instinct screamed trap, but the coordinates in the photo wouldn't let him rest. He grabbed his coat and flashlight, leaving the stove burning low. The pier was nearly deserted when he arrived, the sea black and endless beneath the pale moon. A man stood near the end, tall, thin, wearing a hooded jacket. When he turned, Jack saw a sharp face, dark hair streaked with gray, and deep lines carved by sleepless nights. "You, Miller?" Jack called out. The man nodded. His voice was low, tense. "You shouldn't have come. They're watching everything." "Then start talking." Miller looked around, then handed Jack a small flash drive. "Argus Division isn't defense. It's control. Silent Fang was meant to create obedience. They took German shepherds, war dogs, rescue dogs, and rewired them. Electric conditioning, isolation chambers, deprivation. The goal was to strip emotion, but it didn't work." "Why?" Jack asked. Miller met his eyes. "Because love's not a defect. It's survival. The 5 dogs you have, they didn't break. They bonded. That's why they were marked for disposal. The order came from higher up, from Colonel Jonathan Reeves." Jack froze at the name. His stomach turned. Reeves, his former commanding officer. The man who once preached that emotion was weakness, who ordered soldiers to kill hesitation before it kills you. Reeves had been ruthless in Afghanistan, efficient but soulless. Jack had respected him once, until the day Max died, and Reeves dismissed the loss as acceptable collateral. So Reeves runs Argus now? Miller nodded. And he won't stop. If those dogs are alive, he'll come for them. You need to disappear, Turner. Burn everything. But Jack shook his head, voice low and firm. No, they've had their silence long enough. As Miller turned to leave, Jack watched him vanish into the fog, the sound of footsteps fading into the surf. When he returned to the cabin, the dogs lifted their heads, eyes gleaming in the dim light. Ranger stood first, moving to Jack's side. Jack sank onto the floor, running a hand through his hair. The truth now hung heavy in his chest. Argus wasn't just a company. It was a shadow born from men like Reeves, men who thought loyalty could be programmed and compassion erased. He looked at Ranger, at Luna, at the quiet eyes of Echo. They wanted to turn you into weapons, he whispered, but they made something stronger. Outside, thunder rolled over the sea. Inside, Jack felt the old soldier return, not the man who fought for orders, but the one who fought for what was right. And he knew, for the first time since the war, that another battle was coming, this time for them. The storm rolled in from the Atlantic like an army of ghosts, slamming against the Maine coastline with howling winds and freezing rain. The night sky flashed in bursts of lightning that briefly illuminated the lonely cabin hidden among the pines. Inside, the lights flickered, sputtered, and dimmed again. Jack Turner stood by the window, his tall frame outlined by the erratic glow. The years of service had etched lines across his rugged face, lines of discipline, of loss, of exhaustion. His beard had grown thicker since the last confrontation, silver blending with the dark stubble along his jaw. He looked tired but sharp, every muscle taut, every instinct alive. He knew the feeling in the air. It was the silence that comes before war. The dogs sensed it first. Ranger, the eldest, stood near the front door, his amber eyes scanning the shadows outside. The scars beneath his fur glistened faintly when lightning struck. Beside him, Diesel, the heavy-set protector with the thick tan coat and old wound on his hind leg, shifted his weight and gave a low growl that vibrated through the wooden floor. Luna, the only female, hovered near the staircase, her lean frame trembling with alert energy. She was fear and courage mixed into one. Scout, ever restless, darted from window to window, ears pricked, tail stiff. And Echo, the silent one, stood by the back door, his one cloudy eye fixed on the forest line beyond the cabin, unmoving, unreadable. The power flickered again. Then the cameras outside began to blink erratically. Jack's gaze followed the screen of his security monitor, static, then a flash of movement. Headlights, a truck, 2, maybe 3. They stopped a few hundred yards from the house. He could almost hear the soft thud of doors opening through the storm. "They're here," Jack whispered. His voice was steady, but his chest tightened with something old and familiar, the calm terror before the first shot. He knelt beside Ranger, his rough hand pressing gently against the dog's head. "Stay close," he said. Ranger's tail thumped once, quiet and deliberate. Outside, shadows moved through the rain, men in tactical gear, silent as hunters. Jack saw the outline of one raise a weapon near the porch. He didn't hesitate. The Marine inside him woke like an instinct long dormant. He grabbed his rifle from the wall, loaded with precision. "Positions," he murmured, and somehow the dog seemed to understand. Ranger crouched low near the entryway. Diesel took the flank by the kitchen. Luna and Scout positioned themselves at the stairwell, and Echo guarded the back door. Lightning flashed again, 5 shadows against one storm. The first window shattered. Diesel lunged before Jack could even shout, his massive frame crashing into the intruder as the door splintered open. The man's muffled grunt vanished beneath a snarl of teeth and rain. Ranger followed, a blur of black and brown muscle, slamming into another attacker. The sound was primal, violence and loyalty fused into one heartbeat. Jack moved like he had in Afghanistan, low, controlled, his breath even as he fired a warning shot through the wall to push them back. Luna dashed through the hall, her paws silent against the floorboards. She intercepted a second man trying to flank from the side window, biting into his arm before he could raise his weapon. Scout appeared moments later, smaller but faster, circling to drive him back into Diesel's path. Echo, ever the phantom, remained at the rear. When one of the intruders tried to slip in through the kitchen, Echo met him with cold precision, tackling his leg and holding fast until Jack arrived to disarm him. The storm outside raged harder, wind screaming against the house. The scent of gunpowder and rain filled the air. Jack's mind was steady, every motion deliberate, every shot measured. He wasn't fighting as a Marine bound by orders. He was fighting as a man protecting his family. For a moment, it felt like they were winning. The attackers began to retreat, dragging their injured back toward the trucks. Then, through the chaos, a new sound cut through the storm. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching over gravel. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall and straight-backed, moving without fear. Colonel Jonathan Reeves. He looked almost untouched by the weather. His military coat was soaked but crisp, his gray hair slicked back, his expression as cold as the night itself. The years had not softened him. If anything, they had sharpened him into something harder. His face, once clean-shaven, now carried a shadow of age, and his sharp blue eyes glinted like steel behind the storm. Reeves had always been a man of symmetry and order, a man who believed emotion was the enemy of discipline. Jack had served under him once, had even admired him, until he learned what Reeves truly stood for. "Jack," Reeves had said calmly, stepping onto the porch. His voice carried over the wind, deep and deliberate. "You can't keep them. They were created for a purpose. You're just delaying the inevitable." Jack emerged from behind the broken door, rifle in hand, soaked to the bone but unflinching. His breath steamed in the cold air. "They were created to serve," he said. "But they learned to live." Reeves smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held no warmth. "You think you saved them, but all you did was steal property. They belong to me." Jack's jaw tightened. "They belong to the war. They belong to no one now." Reeves stepped closer, rain dripping from the brim of his coat. "You were always sentimental, Turner. That's why you never made it past command. You confused loyalty with weakness." Behind Jack, Ranger growled low, his body poised like a drawn bow. The other dogs were still, waiting for his command. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the scene. The soldier and his dogs facing the ghost of their past. "You're wrong," Jack said, voice low but steady. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the storm of memory. Max's dying wine, the sand, the blood, Reeves's voice calling it collateral. He raised his weapon. "Loyalty isn't weakness. It's the only thing that makes us human." Reeves tilted his head slightly, his smile fading. "Then I suppose this is where it ends." A single gunshot cracked through the storm. For a moment, time froze. The echo rang across the trees, swallowed by thunder. Then there was silence, the kind that only comes after something irreversible. The storm had passed, leaving the main coastline washed clean and trembling beneath a pale sunrise. The wind carried the scent of salt and pine, the kind of air that felt like forgiveness. The cabin that once echoed with gunfire now stood quiet, its walls patched, but proud, like the man who lived within. Jack Turner stepped out onto the porch, his broad frame silhouetted against the morning light. He wore the same worn flannel shirt he'd had for years, sleeves rolled to reveal arms marked with scars that time had not erased. His dark hair, streaked with silver, was damp with mist, and his beard had grown in thick over the weeks since the attack. He looked older now, but there was a peace in his gray eyes, a stillness that hadn't been there before. Argus Division had fallen. The government investigation had exposed the horrors of Project Silent Fang to the world. The cruelty, the conditioning, the belief that love could be stripped from living beings. News outlets swarmed the story. For days, the country couldn't stop talking about it, about the Marine who had defied orders, about the 5 dogs who had survived the impossible. But Jack never spoke to the press. When a reporter once found her way up the mountain path, a young woman with sharp eyes and a microphone trembling in her hand, he simply said, "There are things you don't need to hear to understand." Then he closed the door gently. He wasn't angry. He was done explaining. Inside the cabin, the dogs stirred as the morning light poured across the floorboards. Ranger, now healthier and heavier, stretched his massive frame with a quiet groan. His coat shone again, dark sable fur brushed to a warm sheen. He had the bearing of a leader even at rest, eyes alert and intelligent, watching the world as if still guarding it. Luna, her fur soft as driftwood, lay near the stove. The small tear on her ear had healed into a faint scar, a badge of gentleness, hard-earned. She had grown fiercely protective of Scout, who was, as always, half trouble and half joy, darting around the room with a ball in his mouth, tail wagging like a flag in the wind. Diesel, solid as a rock, sat near the door, his head resting between his paws, content to be near Jack at all times. And then there was Echo, the quiet one, whose mismatched eyes once saw nothing but fear. He stood near the window now, watching the sea. The haunted stillness in him had faded, replaced by something fragile, but alive, hope. Jack poured coffee into a chipped mug, steam curling around his fingers. He sat by the window, watching the dogs in their morning rhythm, and let the silence settle. His mind wandered to Reeves, now sitting in a military prison somewhere, stripped of rank, stripped of power. Jack had testified only once, briefly. When the prosecutor asked why he risked his life for 5 dogs, his answer had been simple: because someone had to. He hadn't looked at Reeves during the hearing. There was nothing left to say. The man who once believed emotion was weakness now sat alone in a cell, undone by the very thing he tried to erase: compassion. Outside, the wind picked up, playful now instead of violent. Jack stood, stretching the stiffness from his shoulders. "Come on," he said softly, and 5 pairs of ears perked up at once. "You know what day it is." The dogs followed him eagerly to the truck. Every year since the rescue, they made the same pilgrimage, down to the beach where it had all begun. The road was muddy from last night's rain, but the sky was clear. When they reached the shore, the ocean stretched endlessly before them, glittering like glass. The waves whispered instead of roared. Jack opened the door, and the dogs leapt out one by one, their paws sinking into the sand. Scout barked first, racing in wide circles. Diesel lumbered after him, slower but steady. Luna chased the spray of waves, her reflection shimmering in the water. Ranger stood at the water's edge, chest high, ears tilted toward the wind, breathing in the salt air as if recognizing an old battlefield turned sacred. Jack watched them, his heart tightening in that familiar way, a mix of pride, grief, and gratitude. He thought of all they'd endured, of nights spent listening for intruders, of wounds stitched in silence. They had fought not for victory, but for the right to live, and they had won. Echo was the last to approach the shore. He stood beside Jack, still hesitant, tail tucked low but eyes bright. Jack crouched down, resting a hand gently on the dog's neck. "You can run now," he whispered. "You're free." For a moment, Echo only stared at the horizon, as if searching for permission. Then slowly, he lifted his head and released a single, clear bark. It was rough, uncertain, but full of life, the first sound Jack had ever heard from him. The others turned, tails wagging, and together they sprinted across the sand, a blur of fur and sunlight and freedom. Jack laughed quietly, a sound rare and full, echoing against the waves. His eyes burned, but he didn't blink it away. Watching them run, he felt the strange ache of closure, a realization that some wars end, not with surrender, but with forgiveness. He thought of Max, the dog he had lost in Afghanistan, and how for years he had carried guilt like a stone in his chest. Now it was lighter. Maybe this was what redemption looked like. Not medals, not glory, but a pack of once broken souls running under a clean sky. As the sun climbed higher, Jack turned toward the ocean, hands in his pockets, wind tugging at his flannel. His voice was quiet, but the words carried over the waves. "There are battles," he said. "You don't fight with weapons, only with heart." He stood there until the tide began to rise, until the dogs returned to his side, panting and wet, pressing against him as if to remind him that he wasn't alone. The world would move on, the headlines would fade, but here, on this stretch of coast where life and death had once met, there was peace. And in the quiet rhythm of paws against sand, Jack found what he had been searching for all along. Not victory, not vengeance, but grace. Sometimes, Miracles don't arrive as blinding light from the sky. They come quietly, through a heartbeat, a paw print, or the touch of kindness between two souls who were never meant to meet. Jack Turner didn't just rescue 5 dogs. God used him to remind the world that compassion is still the greatest power on earth. Every act of love, no matter how small, is a reflection of His grace. A whisper from heaven saying, "You are not forgotten." In our everyday lives, we may never fight wars or face storms like Jack did, but each of us is given a chance, every single day, to be someone's miracle, to forgive, to protect, to love when the world forgets how. That is where God works, in ordinary people who choose mercy over indifference. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that miracles are real. Comment below where you're watching from and tell us what you're thankful for today. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, loyalty, and second chances. May God bless you, and may His light guide you through every storm you face.